Hello and welcome to the channel, and thank you for joining me this evening. I'm delighted to have Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni with us. Of course, a hero, war hero, uh, amazing. I mean, I was just speaking with him about some of his, which he kind of just casually mentions. He doesn't mention it. I've mentioned it about his one of his acts of bravery in where were we? We were at the glacier, the Siachen Glacier.
Yeah.
That's where you had that experience, and I was just telling the general that that's a story there, that's a film there, right there, because it's just an insane act of bravery that I think most of us civilians can't even understand or imagine. I mean, we get a little cold and the heaters are on, and to be in that situation and to be defending your country and losing people and fighting the enemy, I mean, it's just insane.
Nothing. Thank you very much. As I was talking to you and telling you, Raat gayi, baat gayi. So we have to now see the future. What best can we do now? What we have done is all over and finished. That's it. And we mustn't, bask in the glory. I did this or we did this. Nothing. Nobody does it. You are connected with the army. There's no I. It's all we. It's the team that does, because team means together everybody achieves more, and there's no I, and that's the way we all are brought up. And well, we'll now talk whatever you wish to. We go ahead, but thank you very much for inviting me. Knowing your credentials of an excellent author, well done. A pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much, General, because my viewers usually troll me, so that really helps. Coming from you, that's a good endorsement.
No, perfect, very fine.
All right, let's get going. A little bit of a backstory for our viewers, if you could tell us about this Khalistan issue. Why does it seem to have such deep roots in Canada? How did we get to this point where they are so pampered, so protected, and so present?
If you look back in history, you find that uh, we call it Canada. For them it is Canada. Every now and then they have to rush to Canada because that is the place where they find that obviously, because it's a place where population is a little bit of a problem, because it is a very cold country and hardworking people, and Sikhs were known to be hardworking. And after the Second World War, a sizable number decided to settle down as part of the Allied forces, as part of the Commonwealth. And you found slowly and steadily there was a sizable Sikh population in Canada, there's a sizable Sikh population in Italy. So wherever the Second World War campaigns where the Indians participated, because India also had a sizable, because we had at that point of time 25 lakh in the army, and all of them virtually deployed for the British, fighting in the Second World War all across various campaigns. So the Sikhs were a sizable contributory factor. The Muslims were a huge contribution to the British Army, primarily because India, at that point of time, under Mahatma Gandhi's call of quit India, a lot of Hindus were not permitted, or were, hesitating to join the British Army. Of course, subsequently, when it opened up, it was quite late. But then, by then, the Muslims had a sizable, proportion, because Jinnah was all for with the British, and therefore, even in 25 lakhs, they had over, I would say, 30 to 40% representation during the Second World War. And after that, also, we find that in 47, 48, when India got independence, we are all part of Commonwealth. You find that the Canadians have been very much vociferous, and even in Kashmir, when supporting the plebiscite in Kashmir. Again, that's because you found that a lot of these people from Rajouri, Punj, who were called the Punjis, and all these people who were part of the Second World War, when the Indian army was brought down from 25 lakhs to 4.5 lakhs in 1945. By 47, India got independence. From 4.5 lakhs of the army, 1.5 lakh Muslims joined the Pakistan army. The balance of them, with few Muslims and majority Hindus and Sikhs, joined the Indian army. So all these people who got demobilized had weapons with them. And all that Rajouri, Punch, you find where people, even though they were demobilized, kept weapons. And therefore you found in 47, 48, all this movement from Kashmir into India sponsored by Pakistan. A sizable number of them are in UK, and find you for a sizable number of them are in Canada. So, being a Commonwealth, of course, the free movement and the things are. So, you found that with Canada, India has had excellent relations because obviously, and even today also, you find that in terms of you say contribution of Canada to the Indian economy, maybe about 1% of the GDP, very small sum in the entire trade is concerned. But pulses, 25% of the pulses we import from Canada, primarily because the Sikhs who are there, controlling farming. Even though the Sikhs may be just about 3% of the population, or rather the Indian community or Indian, I would say Indian people of Indian origin in Canada, maybe about 1.6 million, and around maybe constituting about 3 to 4% of the population. Even in that, you have about say 2.5% Hindus, 2.1% Sikhs, about 4.5 to 4.9% Muslims. So that's the kind of say, and even amongst the Muslims, a sizable number from Pakistan, India. Then you find that Pakistan had its own this thing with India in a little before 84, things that went on, and then all that we know what happened in 84. Primarily, again, Pakistan instrumental in coaxing, instigating all these Khalistanis from across the border, their involvement in drugs, so whole lot of things in Canada. Canada also had those two governments, the liberal and the conservatives. Every time the conservatives are in power, you find they have very good relations with India. Because from 2000, I would say from 6 till, or rather from, almost from 2006 till 2015, excellent relationship. So much so that Prime Minister Modi visited Canada after 1973 for the first time in 2015. And then the nuclear, the kind of nuclear this thing agreement on for uranium. There's that. So there was a lot that was happening between India and Canada, and it does happen. And even now, of course, right now, the situation is at the rock bottom as much as it is in cricket, losing three straight, the series to New Zealand, 3-0. I think the similar kind of thing has now happened between the Indo-Canada relationship, rock bottom, primarily because of Khalistan. Again, the word is Khalistan, because though very small minority, very small number in Canada, but politically very, very strong. And because of their philanthropic, attitude, the ability to move around, extrovert, take people along. And the present Prime Minister of Canada, his own father, in also Trudeau, he also at that point of time, the way he did support, I think he supported Parmar, if I'm not wrong. He was also a separatist at that point of time in 1982, and he was responsible for killing of police officers in Punjab. And when he went back to Canada, he was been sheltered in Canada. So you find that this, right from his father's days, the support to the people who with separatist tendencies were being supported in Canada, and it carried on. Then Kanishka.
Yes,
so
that's
you
what I think.
heard about, yeah.
General, it's not only the fact, because like you pointed out, the numbers are not that significant. So there is, of course, a lot of money involved as well, because you cannot separate politics from money. So obviously the politicians there, especially the Liberal Party, there must be some sort of transactional relationship also, because it's really befuddling to see the kind of support an ideology that has essentially killed no one less than the prime minister of a country, of a democracy. So us democracies should be able to understand each other, is being supported and sheltered by the Canadians. It just doesn't make any sense. Do you think there is money involved?
See, what happens, both democracies, both believe in the rule of law, but both on issues of Khalistan seem to be different. Otherwise, on most issues, they're on the same page. There is no problem at all. But yes, what you just said, money, definitely a big money. Because Trudeau's government has a point of time, every time it requires support, it requires the National Democratic Alliance headed by the Sikhs. So the Sikhs, who are a sizable portion, about even in the parliament, they have I would say, Indian origin, about 22 odd members of parliament in the Canadian parliament. They have a cabinet minister also now over there. We had the defense minister, Sajjan, who was there of Canada, a Sikh gentleman, whom Amrinder, when he was the chief minister of Punjab, refused to meet, saying that, well, he supports Khalistanis, he supports separatists. So there is, of course, and again, as I said, the Sikhs as a community over there, though a very small sum, but yes, have huge farms, have lots of money, have tremendous remittances to India. There's a lot of other, I would say, even Hawala money which must be flowing in from somewhere where sizable there. So there is no denying the fact the present government rests for support on that small party, the National Democratic Alliance of the Sikhs. So there is even the Babar Khalsa, which was involved in the Kanishka crash. You find that they were involved and they were still being supported in Canada. You find that people who were involved in the killing are being invited by the Prime Minister in Canada for dinner. So there is something which connects between the two, on especially in this, and surprisingly, again, very very surprisingly, primarily because we are democracies, like you rightly said. We both countries believe in the rule of law. We are part of the Commonwealth. We have almost a similar kind of upbringing and kind of this thing. But despite that, but of course, now it could be a coincidence. You find that China and Canada have excellent relations, and therefore we find that India and China, well, the relations are just about, after what happened in East Dark, things have now started
Yes,
to improve upon.
yes,
Maybe things will improve, but otherwise Canada and China had good relations. India and China didn't have good relations, and therefore you find that in a triangle, you find India not having good relations with Canada at this point of time, and India didn't have good relations with China. Now you find between India, Pakistan, and China, similar kind of a situation where
China,
India doesn't
yeah.
have good relations with Pakistan, but Pakistan has good relations with China, and therefore in this triangle, you find your enemy is my friend. That kind of a
That's
situation in which you.
but that's what's interesting, General, is that given the scenario and the way you've explained it, the China or the C factor in it, the Americans, you would assume, would be a little more sensible about it, considering they're going at China all the time, and India is the one big power in the region, which could be an American ally and a good ally. And yet, rather than playing the role of peacemaker, they've basically doubled down and backed up Canada's accusations and made them even more
See,
public.
See what happens in this entire thing. We are good partners. We are not any more non-aligned as everybody talks about. We are a multi-aligned country with our own strategic interest in the entire world is concerned. With that kind of a situation, you find that even in Canada, the kind of protests and demonstrations, Khalistani flags there. You find protests and demonstrations in Canada having Khalistani flag there. You had this temple incident recent, again Khalistani flag there. Again, you find Niger involved in it. Again, the connection over there. You find Pannu in America. Then allegations against the Union Home Minister. Allegations, the kind of FIR, not FIR, I would say, but kind of a notice given to the NSA in India, in America. All these kind of things, I don't think, especially America, at the government level, I think we all must be conscious of the fact that we are all democracies, and that we are all responsible nations, and that we must talk to one another properly on these issues, because these are sensitive issues. Even with America, we find the Khalistani issue, which is now Pannu, the seek for justice. It's all injustice then. It leads to something which is not correct. Similarly, with Canada, you'll find the same kind of thing with the Niger incident being blown out of proportion. Well,
Yeah,
but if you find that complete Hamas leadership wiped out, you will find complete this thing. Nobody seems to say. Here we are not
yeah,
even involved. You find that some Lawrence Bishnoi gangs doing inter-rivalry amongst themselves, weapons being freely available. And this is quite common. It's nothing very, these gang wars. In India, it's common. Same people are going there. They find shelter there. They come over here. Money plays a big role. I think it's very important that the countries themselves must stay away from it and keep a watch. Definitely keep a watch. Be transparent. Be able to share information with each other. Be able to tell them what exactly has gone wrong. But relations between countries, and especially today, when the world is no longer unipolar, it's a multipolar world, multi-alignments are taking place. India is no longer aligned to a particular this thing. Each one of us play a role. India is a growing power. India is the fifth largest economy today, will soon be the third largest economy, has tremendous technological strength, has ability to absorb technology, has tremendous amount of skill in India. India is a huge market. India is progressing at a rate which nobody realizes what is going to happen. India by 2047 might turn up become a $20 trillion economy or $25 trillion economy if it goes even at 7.5%. Is growing right now at that 6.5 to 7%. So there is tremendous amount of hope which is there from India, and India believes in the rule of law. India is a democracy. Everything is out in the everything is transparent in India. You can feel tremendous amount of freedom of speech and things. So there's lot that is common between India, Canada, US, and the democracies the world over. I think that is what must be cultivated and encouraged, rather than this one small thing. Obviously, it's a very a pinprick, because we also have suffered
But remember,
1984. We know what has happened. Yeah.
correct. And hey, Sandeep, welcome to the show.
Yeah.
Sandeep was on his way from work, so that's why. And he was polite enough not to repeat a Pallavi and call us from the car. So I appreciate that, Sandeep, that you're stationary. But Sandeep,
Sandeep is again an excellent man, knows more than anybody else.
I know, I know. I'm so excited by this panel today because it's going to be really, really informative. Sandeep, I remember a couple of years ago, there was a Baloch activist who was killed in Canada. And it was alleged, and reliably so, that the ISI had a hand in it, which is, of course, the Pakistani intelligence agency. We never saw Canada react like that. We never saw any sort of actions that have followed since. Neither did we see the Americans getting into it. Americans, who I might add, are housing David Headley, the man responsible for the most devastating terror attack on Indian soil, an American citizen. So this smacks of hypocrisy, even in terms of what their own stated stand has been.
Absolutely, Advait. I think you've hit the nail on the head. We've never seen this kind of outrage for other such incidents in the past on Canadian soil. And Captain Amrinder Singh, who was former Punjab Chief Minister, now a BJP leader, he's just posted a long 4-page statement on X, where he actually describes the slow descent, Canada's slow descent into lawlessness, and how they started encouraging separatism. And he obviously goes back to the time that Trudeau visited India, and he insisted on bringing Harjit Sajjan, his defense minister, who Captain Amrinder refused to meet because he said he was a Khalistani sympathizer. And through Captain Amrinder's letter, you see the slow descent of Canada into this thing of encouraging separatism, gangsterism, this kind of obsession that the state of Canada seems to have developed, especially under Prime Minister Trudeau. And he holds no one but Trudeau responsible for this, singularly him, no one else. And there's another interesting statement that's out today, Advaita, which if you remember, it's Ujjal Dosanjh, a very respected Canadian politician of Indian origin, a Sikh politician who was Trudeau's member of parliament, a colleague as an MP. And he writes with great anguish. He, solely blames Justin Trudeau for this. So, it's not actually an Indo-Canadian problem. It is a problem that's been created by this one man, Justin Trudeau, this scorched earth
But
policy.
why is it so personal with him? Because remember, during the G20, his plane
Yes.
didn't function. So he was essentially locked up in his presidential suite, wherever he was staying, Leela or Claridge's. No, Claridge's was Macron. He was in Leela or somewhere. But he was locked in that presidential suite. He didn't really have any visitors or didn't visit with any government officials. I'm sure Government of India would have offered him a plane ride back.
Yes.
I think that would be, something that was very obvious. He didn't accept that. It was all just really strange and very weird.
It is. It seems to me this one man's crusade, Advaita. The last couple of years, whatever we've seen, this acceleration of the Canadian Khalistani cause, and I call it a Canadian Khalistani cause because there doesn't seem to be an iota of sympathy for either Khalistan or Canadian Khalistanis here in Punjab. And this whole thing seems to have been nurtured under the stewardship of Justin Trudeau. And it seems to be this one man's personal quest to make sure that he goes down in history as the person who was single-handedly scorched Indo-Canadian ties. And there seems to be some kind of a family history to this, Advaita. If you remember, his father, Pierre Trudeau, was the prime minister when you had the Kanishka
Ganesh.
being formed almost 4 decades ago, 1985. So it's like history repeating itself, and it's very eerie because we were on a show a few hours earlier with General Kulkarni, where you had one of our senior diplomats who was posted in Canada at the same time that Trudeau Senior was the prime minister. And he seemed to say, Ambassador Fabian, he said, we were going through a similar situation back then in the mid 80s where Indians were being targeted over there, the diplomats were under attack, and all of this seemed to happen with the sly collaboration of the state of Canada itself. And this is also what we've begun to hear with this current round of violence, the targeting of the temples, the Indian missions over there. All of this seems to have some kind of state hand in this. And that's what makes it so bizarre, Advaita, that we've never faced this kind of a situation with any Western democracy.
Yeah.
Certainly not of the kind that with Canada. Even in the past, I don't think it was as blatant as this. And what's happened is that there is this element of gangsterism, of drug trafficking that has crept into this whole mix. It's a very heady cocktail of drugs and separatism and violence and gangsters and all of this mixed together. Last week there was a drug bust in one of the Canadian cities that was where they recovered meth. They recovered a super lab. They cracked open a super lab which was making meth for, believe it or not, $500 million worth of drugs, and many of them were people of Indian origin. So, in conversations with Canadian citizens, concerned people, Indo-Canadian bloggers, they all tell us that these guys are all hand in glove. It's difficult to see when the the Canadian Khalistanis, trail off, and where the drug, again the Indo-Canadian Khalistani drug lords and gangsters, they're all part of the same gang, and they're all working in concert. And again, there's this other thing of saying that, they are just in a minority. It's a very small percentage. Ujjwal Dosanjh also says that there's almost 1 million Sikhs in Canada, very proud Sikhs, but he says less than 5% of them are Khalistanis. But Advaita, you know this better than anyone else. It's always that minority within the larger community, that determined minority that actually forces the silent majority to follow suit. And this is possibly what we are seeing in Canada as well. It's a very, very, very.
This is where I start going into the money aspect and the drugs aspect more than any ideological need for Khalistan, because a couple of reasons for that. As General Kulkarni, before you joined us, Sandeep was telling us about the history of the Sikh settlements in Canada, Britain, Italy, post the Second World War. But this, by that definition, the present generation is probably the third generation in Canada.
Yes,
approximately.
Third and possibly the fourth as well.
Possibly even the fourth. So it's not that they've lived here. Their parents haven't. In some cases, their grandparents have never lived in India. They may have some relatives, and sure, there are a lot of Sikhs who have traveled over and gone over and taken PR. But it's not an emotive issue in that sense. This is a very well settled immigrant population. In fact, I dare say, if we told them that here you go, here's your Khalistan, come and settle there, I think most of them would prefer to live in Surrey and Brampton in British Columbia and have all the Western conveniences of life, as opposed to being over here. I mean, there's a reason why so many migrate to Canada in the first place in present day. So I don't necessarily.
Here's my point. Sorry to interrupt you, but here's the thing, that maybe there is a case to be made for Khalistan to be created in British Columbia, given the sheer number.
We're getting there.
Yeah,
we're getting there. I mean, I visited.
There are a number of Canadian Khalistanis who seem to want this. Since so many of you are already there, why don't you make Khalistan where you live?
I think we're getting there, because I don't think they would want to come to third world locations, so to speak. But the thing is, I was there, General. I was there in 2013, I think it was, or 14, and in BC and in Vancouver, and of course went for a little, drive around as you do in a new town to get a feel of the place. And one of the places that I was taken to was the Indian section, which was basically Brampton, Surrey, these parts. And I was told very clearly that, there is an annual parade that comes out, in which Indira Gandhi is on that float, and it's a reenactment of her assassination. And in the gurudwaras there is of course Bhindranwala's image, and he's a sant, and many times one has seen that Canadian politician Jagmeet be on TV and being asked to call him a terrorist and refusing to, despite the actions committed by him. So there is this very comfortable ambiguity, which seems to get a pass in Canada, and which is assumed to be free expression. But do you think the Canadians, because of Trudeau's policies, when it comes to Khalistan, are heading for trouble? Because we know here what they're capable of doing.
See, what happens is these kind of things cannot flourish until unless supported. Because you cannot be speaking against anybody. Supposing we were to hold similar demonstration outside the Canadian embassy in Delhi today, would they appreciate it? Nobody will appreciate it. So it is something which flows right from the top. If you're going to tell the police, if the police itself is involved, or you have your people into the police and you wanting to pay, then speak about human rights, speak about freedom of speech, democracy, expression, everything and anything, just to suit you, I think then it is wrong. Because you say, after all, these are interests of the countries are concerned. You must understand what is that country is sensitive about. They know if the militants, the terrorists of India were to be, be given a state welcome in UK, would we appreciate it? Would we appreciate someone who has murdered people in India be given a state dinner in Canada? Who will appreciate it? Nobody will appreciate it. And it's very common. It's nothing, that you feel bad about it. And therefore, if the government of Canada, and that's where I agree with Sandeep, if the Prime Minister himself was to take a stand, but right now, difficult for him because politically, as I said, the National Democratic Alliance which is supporting the Liberals right now, and their government is dependent on them. Obviously, it's a question of power. And in that power, you cannot afford to do that. It's very difficult. In that context, you find otherwise it's badly affected. The trade will be affected. There's no denying. The $25 billion investment in Indian insurance. That's the kind of money that has flown in. There's almost a $5 billion trade. So they were at one point of time over 4.5 lakh students from India. They've dropped drastically to less than 2 lakh. So obviously it will be affected. Canada is not seen as, you can't call India a country which is criminally involved or enemy or this or that. It's not done, because this kind of things and these kind of words are not to be used when there are two responsible governments, both democratic and both which believe in the rule of law. And there's so much common between all of us that it is that which needs to be taken forward. And these little pinpricks have to be ensured at the government level to be curbed, so that, okay, you have a certain amount of this. It's not new. As I told you, right from 47, 48, the Canadian plebiscite, the entire thing, always with the plebiscite and support over there. Subsequently, from 82 onwards, you found the kind of Khalistanis support which they found in Canada. It was there. But if you have these kind of things, the councillor over there in front, where 1,000-odd life certificates were to be given, the Indians only, poor thing, need to be given life certificates. How else will they get their pensions? How else will they get the other benefits over here in India? So all of it is being done. But you have, all the diplomats expelled from here, all the diplomats expelled from. So these kind of things, I think, is better that both the governments sit down, talk, and do not carry too far. And it's very, very important, because if it's carried too far, and that's where I agree with Sandeep 100%. The head of the state has to play a big role. And that role is, he has to tell, just stop it. Enough is enough. We can't afford to spoil relations with countries. Individually, we'll sort it out, whatever it is. But not.
Isn't it a bit late for that, Sandeep, General? I mean, we've expelled top diplomats, each country. short of opening borders against each other. I mean, that's really the last recourse, right? If you expel an ambassador of a country, of a so-called
Yes.
friendly country, it's pretty bad. But I want to tag that on to another question, which is, we see this a lot with the Western democracies, be it the UK or Canada or the US. For example, in the UK, there are economic fugitives from India who are living the life, be it
Yes.
a Vijay Mallya or a Nirav Modi, who are completely, protected, shielded. You have to go through long, legal cases to get them, to extradite them back. So that's, of course, the economic fugitive. Then you have the criminal fugitive, who's also in these countries, and they're so comfortably hosting them, and then expect India to give them a priority over Russia or a China or all these countries. It doesn't work that way anymore. And how much of an element of it is just plain old racism?
Well, Advaita, interesting, a very important point. And, we have no less than the National Security Advisor, Mr. M.K. Narayanan, who was the NSA, as you know, in 2611. He gave us an interview where he very clearly said, look, the US knew about the 2611 plot, and they didn't give us the full picture because David Headley was a mole. He was working for the Drug Enforcement Agency and perhaps even the CIA. They were giving us this little drips and drabs of intelligence, but never the full picture. And he believes that the US had the full picture of what was going to happen, unfold on 26/11. And, David Headley is prosecuted. He is arrested, he is prosecuted, and he is tried for a crime of not 26/11, but for trying to attack the offices of a Danish newspaper that published cartoons that offended the Prophet Muhammad. And it was at that time that it was for the 2010 attack that David Headley was picked up, when they discovered that their prized double agent was actually a triple agent. He had gone rogue. And that is when they arrested David Headley. But until then, it was fine. He was undercover. Nobody knew about the existence of someone like David Headley. It was nearly 2 years after 26/11, after the mayhem of 26/11, including including 6 Americans were killed among the 160 odd people killed. 6 Americans were killed in 26/11, and it's nearly 2 years later we discover the existence of this gentleman named David Coleman Headley, who's been a double agent all through, and he was continuing to shuttle between India and Pakistan and the United States. It's only when Headley tries to target another European country that he is actually brought to justice. What does this tell you about Western double standards, Advaita? Exactly what you just spoke of.
General, we of course have this, conflictorial relationship when we fought wars with China. Russia has transformed, gone from the Soviet Union to Russia. There's been a lot of changes there. India has grown closer to the West. But net, at the end of the day, we don't have these kind of issues with these countries. You don't have economic fugitives or Khalistan supporters threatening violence to Indian airplanes and people and the embassies sitting in Moscow. That doesn't happen. Or in Beijing, for that matter, when we have such an up and down relationship with China. But they are in Washington, D.C., they are in San Francisco, they are in Toronto, they are in Ontario, they are in BC, they are in London. We saw what they did outside London, our High Commission there. So it's I mean, one doesn't understand it. Frankly, one doesn't.
See what happens with Russia, China. It's a one man, and you will not find anything happening there, whatever it is. If you say take China for instance, even relations with India. 5 years back, if the relations went bad, it was Mr. Xi Jinping who wanted it that way. If the relations today are improving, it is he who wants it that way. So everything is directed, controlled, and everything is happening. So you can't demonstrate over there. If anybody starts demonstrating there, well, they know what is it that they're going to get it. Similarly, in Russia, if we have good relations with Russia, they are something time tested. They're there. It is there because they want it that way, and it'll be done, and they will go out of the way to ensure. America, for that matter, Canada, UK are democracies where they allow certain times to be doing this, which is maybe with the purpose that let it carry on. These are checks and balances. It's kind of acupressure tactics. You do it here, you do it here. You don't support me here. You know what? I can do it over there. That kind of a thing. So these kind of things do happen. But in the larger sphere, you will find that even otherwise also, Indians feel very comfortable going, say, to America, going to UK, going to Canada, no problem. Language is not a problem. They understand. They all respect Indians. The Indian passport is something which is a very respected. They all know that here's a person who's come to work, is an intelligent man who's come. Well, he has a lot to contribute. If they don't have, they will suddenly find the Americans have said, no, plane loads of people, illegal immigrants. Come on, go back. And so they don't bother, whatever it be. So these are some strengths of democracies, some shortfalls of democracies, some good points of one man. This thing, an autocratic communist governments where things are controlled, things are managed. If you ask China, probably Chinese will say the only thing they don't like about India is the media. The Indian media is something they can't stand. They cannot imagine why is the Indian media always doing what they are doing. This is important, but then the Indian media also has a huge role to play because it is a check and balance which works everywhere. So there are pluses and minuses for everything, and we have good relations. And I think even with, as I said, conservative government in Canada, 2006 to 2015. My God, what fantastic relationship India had with Canada! All of it. 25% of the pulses being imported, so much so that at a point of time, even though there were pulses available in India, we still imported from Canada with the hope of trying to, ensure that the prices don't rise in India. So there was a tremendous amount of, give and take that was happening between India and Canada. Pharmaceuticals, there's, nuclear, a lot of activities, trade, everything, students, so many lakhs of students. And Canada was always seen as never, but not even I don't think anybody can even think of Canada with a relation with ambassadors and high commissioners. We are all part of Commonwealth. Same, everything is same. But then, well, it has happened. And I think one cause, Khalistan, which they should not support, and one man, Mr. Trudeau, who must not sort of give shelter to these people. And in fact, he should play a bigger role by telling them, look, don't spoil our relations between the two countries. I allow you to do in my country. You please go ahead and do whatever you want to say. You want to protest, please go ahead and protest. No problems at all. You need to fly flags, do what you want to do, but you will not do anything that spoils the relationship between the two countries, and do not do against the councillor, this, that, and that is how the countries must, move forward. That is how I see. And if I were anyone's place, I would also say the same. Well, we are a democracy. You're permitted to do. You want to speak against me, by all means. With certain restrictions are there, by all means, go ahead, do. But the two countries' relationship will not, because you're all part of Commonwealth. We are all democracies. We've been a part of a whole system, and therefore, please ensure that these things are not done. Rest is all yours. Live well, eat well, enjoy yourself. That's the way it should be.
Correct. But Sandeep, this is sort of feel good, and this is the way it should be. But then there's also what's happening in our neighborhood. Look at what's happening in Bangladesh, the kind of instability there, the regime change there, the way it was handled, the way they literally flew in a president who was known to be very close to Western powers. Is there more to this, support to these kind of elements in these countries than just free speech? Because there is a line when it comes to free speech that you cannot cross. And that line has been crossed over and over again, to the extent what we saw yesterday, where the temple was attacked and the cops, General, I don't know if you've seen those videos, but the cops, they were handling the Khalistanis in a certain way, and they handled the Hindu side, which is and including two 16-year-old boys, who they basically smashed to the ground, as a result of which their teeth broke, and the other people around were saying, they're kids, go a little easy. But it was so different, even the way they were handling the two opposing sides. So, Sandeep, to you.
Yeah, absolutely, Advaita. I think there is a certain apartheid here at play. If I may use that word, it's a strong word, but when you see the kind of double standards that we are faced with when it comes to the Western world, and why only these recent cases of what we've been seeing in Canada? If you look at the way the United States has reacted to hate speech that has the potential for inciting violence as well. We have seen the US taking very swift proactive action. If you remember, there were many years back, there was a case of an Indian student called Vikram Buddhi. He was the son of a naval officer who was in a US university. He said he made some very violent remarks about one of the US presidents, and he was immediately picked up, thrown into prison, and he served a lengthy prison sentence before he was let off. You have cases like an American preacher, Anwar al-Awlaki, who was in Yemen. He didn't carry
Yemen.
out terror attacks, but he incited violence. He asked others to carry out violent attacks, and he was droned by the CIA. They sent a drone to kill him. That's how the West approaches.
You know his story, Sandeep?
Like,
It's interesting. They offered him a blonde fourth wife, and that
yes,
was who they were tracking. And
yes.
then they sent a drone out to
And
finish
they
him.
send the drone after, but
Yeah.
that's how they operate. And here you have this individual called Panun, who many people believe is actually an agent for the US deep state.
I wouldn't be
What
surprised.
else could explain the way the man spews venom and incites violence, targets Indian airlines like Air India specifically, tells you which date not to travel, all of this, and he's able to do all of this in full public view in broad daylight. There's no one calling him. It's all supposed to be freedom of speech. And I was just wondering, would India allow an Indian national on Indian soil to carry out these kind of hateful speeches to incite violence against Americans or American nationals or American interests even? Absolutely not. So what explains this double standard? And my mind straight away goes down to thinking of them as intelligence assets, and possibly the fact that they're being cultivated, like you mentioned, this other gentleman who had been parachuted in out of nowhere, and suddenly he's the most powerful person in Bangladesh. It's quite possible that all of these people are being cultivated as assets for levers, for all to influence Indian policy, because how else do you exercise influence on a country that is halfway across the world, right?
Hmm.
And which is coming into its own. It's
Yeah.
through all of these,
Absolutely.
rotten apples like Pannun and Nijar, who was killed in a bout of gang violence. So it's all of these people, and now we know that the number of gangsters who are, being sheltered in Canada, Advaita, the record numbers. There are literally hundreds of gangsters who are on Canadian soil. And it all comes back to that Hillary Clinton quote. I can't think of a quote better than that. If you rear snakes in your backyard, why do you think that the snakes are only going to bite your neighbor? Sooner or later, they'll turn on you as well. And
Yeah.
tens of thousands of Canadians have died in gun violence, in gang wars, in drug overdoses. And Canada seems to believe that
And
all
Sandeep, important to point out, British Columbia, BC, has very high rates of drug addiction and
yes,
overdoses. So there you
absolutely. Something like 60 or 70,000 Canadians have died because of drug overdoses in the last 8 years alone. That's a very large number of people dying in a country of that size, a small country, thinly populated country like Canada. And the arms haul that, when they busted that super lab last week, I saw the seizure pictures, and General Kulkarni would have thought that possibly an infantry division had been raided, because the kind of assault rifles that were recovered, pistols, assault rifles, grenades,
Where
ammunition. I
was
mean,
this? Where
this
was
was in
this?
Canada, in cities of Canada, where they busted
Yeah.
this meth lab, the super lab, where they recovered something like $500 million worth of drugs. They had assault rifles, they had pistols, automatic weapons. It was like a military unit had been raided, and that's the kind of sophisticated arsenal that you're talking of. And Canada is allowing all of this to flourish possibly because, when you have these bad characters floating around, Advaita, it's very easy to carry out intelligence operations. And this is exactly what happened in 1985 also, if you remember, where the Canadian intelligence had penetrated the Kanishka bombers. They knew exactly what these guys were up to, and they might possibly even participated in the bombing of that Air India aircraft. So that's this Canada that we are confronted with today. And it would have been okay if it had been just Canada's problem, Advaita, but unfortunately not. It has deep implications for India as well. All of these gangsters have ties back home, and there's a back and forth, arms, gangs, gangsters, ideology, drugs, all of this, exactly in the way that ISIS, when ISIS had control over Raqqa and it was broadcasting from the middle of Syria, which they had captured, it was attracting all kinds of rotten people from across the world, and it was sending them back, brainwashing them, doing that. The similar things happening in Canada right now.
I think all British Columbia needs is like a cop or a politician who's tough on crime, and you'll
Yes.
see flagrations of protest, ideological protest. But
Yes.
General, I really want to ask you this, and this is my final question. I promised you only 45 minutes, and we're unfortunately there already. But I hope you'll come back. But what is the possibility of when Sandeep says we're just in different geographies, right? So it's not easy for anyone to create mischief in that sense, where you're border to border or neck to neck. But what is the possibility of low intensity civil wars like situations in the country happening, and how do we protect ourselves from those situations? Because like Sandeep again pointed out, these are people, yes, they live in the US, but they have deep connections in India, including money, power, land, family, all of those things.
See, all of these play a role. Proxy war, they call it. This hybrid war, proxy war, cyber war. All of them are involved. You don't have to be a neighbor. You can be hundreds of miles away and still be able to create problems in a country which you wish to create problems, or you want to change something. So it is possible. It is nothing that is not possible. It's very important for a democracy like India, where there's diversity, that internally we must stay united, irrespective of it. There will be none who will come and support India when it comes to anything which has gone wrong, whether it's a disaster or it's a war or it's any terrorist activity, insurgency, nationalism, anything and everything. It's our battle. It's our war. We have to learn to handle it, and we have to have our eyes and ears. We have to ensure there should be no question of anyone from India talking a different language when he goes abroad. No question. We all have to be on the same page. It's our country, irrespective of the kind of diversity that we have. It is truly, we have to stay together. It is our world. We are a very old civilization. We are very capable of everything, and we are proving ourselves slowly and steadily. Of course, the democracies have their own little, challenges, but those are all easily negotiable, easily done. Nothing that cannot be done in India. And therefore, it's very important that we must have our eyes and ears. We must be careful of what's going to happen. Capacity building takes time, and we must build our capacities, irrespective. If you are economically strong, you're technologically strong. If you're militarily strong, you will be diplomatically strong. Nobody will touch you. But if you're not one of amongst this, you'll find countries will start, trying to exploit you. Because again, the Rajas and the Maharajas have gone from India, but this new political system creates Rajas and Maharajas who want to hold on to the power. And the result is the people in India also have to understand, if a person is not good, he should be voted out of power. But if the person is good, hold his hand, give him the best that you can, so that the country moves forward. It's in the interest of. Imagine what's happening in Ukraine. Imagine what's happening in Gaza. See what's happening in Lebanon, one of the most beautiful countries in the world. Just see what's happened, and look what we are here enjoying ourselves. Everything is going perfectly fine. Why is that happening? Because the nation knows how to handle itself. The leadership knows what is to be done. everyone's working well. And this strength is what our people in India must understand, that this is our strength. Why are people cultivating India? Why are they wanting India to be their friend? Why is India looking at, or the world sees India as the leader in global south? That's because they see India as someone reasonable. They see India as someone where there's a rule of law. They see India where there's leadership. There is something happening. Technologically, India is very, very strong. They can absorb technology. They can share technologies. If need, they can ring up India. Common language. We speak in so many languages in India. English is a language which we communicate with the entire world. We have so many things that are there in India, and therefore, irrespective of the diversity that we may have, there's a unity which is common, and that is we are Indians, and that must be. So, I would look at it. That is where the strength lies, and that strength must be exploited. Not look at the weaknesses of the world. And moment we have cracks within the system, or internally there are cracks, or internally people can be exploited, you will not, people or countries abroad will not hesitate in exploiting that, be it on religious grounds, be it on economic ground, be it on technological grounds, cyber, space, anything and everything.
And even those who we consider friends, because after all, at
Yes.
the end of the day, it's about national self-interest. And I think
Yes.
that's very important to understand. Sandeep, I'm going to ask you a slightly mischievous question. I think what General said made a lot of sense. And it is followed, I think, for the most part by most ordinary Indians, but for a few, of course. In fact, when the Canadian situation erupted, I was surprised. The politicians also, I mean, even Manish Tiwari and, Congresses, they were also with the government on this one. However, Sandeep, people in your fraternity,
The media.
media,
Right.
there were some people, some who've worked in your previous organizations, very well-known names. I don't want to name anybody, but everyone knows who they are, who were kind of, taking up for what the Canadians were saying and how India must answer and India is answerable and how wonderful it is that in Canada, there are questions raised and even of politicians and how, alas, it doesn't happen in India, etc., etc., etc. What is wrong with the media? When politicians can come together and stand behind the country, the
Right.
media still seems to have a problem doing that.
Yeah, well, Advait, I think it's because we don't see through the duplicity that's at work over here. When a lot of these countries were lecturing us on human rights and these so-called targeted killings and all that, their stance seems to be do as we say, not as we do. And it's like you can't do the kind of things that we do to protect your national interests. Hypothetically, if there is someone who's advocating secessionism in India, which is a red line for us, Veta, in India, you cannot have people advocating a breakup of the country. We've been through literally blood and
Yes,
sacrifice in the
yes.
last not so long in our lifetimes, just a few
And that
decades.
is what the Western nations also need to understand, is
Yes.
that India has gone through a very bloody partition. So when they say, oh, Brexit, or does Scotland want to stay with the UK,
Yes.
or for that matter, Quebec with Canada, and it's all very, in conversation and debates. That's not what the experience India has had. So
Absolutely
we
not.
are
And
hypersensitive about
all
this.
all our victories are very hard fought, Advaita, whether it is in partition, the violence of partition, whether it is to reclaim Siachen. General Kulkarni, I mean, is one of our most heroic soldiers. He's actually physically crawled up on Siachen and he's got Siachen back for us. But for him, I don't think Siachen would have been part of India. And that is how we have literally fought to maintain our sovereignty and our territorial integrity, and capture our territory, hold it, because we are a status quo power at the end of the day. But when we see conspiracies like this at work across, being fanned by countries overseas for whatever reasons, for reasons of influence, or to cultivate levers to have some say in this whole puppet show that they want to run, that's when I think red lines are crossed, and then governments start doing what they think is best in their national interests. And
Yep.
Russia would do it in one way, India would do it in another way, probably the United States does it in another way, Canada would do it possibly what Justin Trudeau is doing now, which is sheltering Khalistani terrorism is what he thinks is in Canada's best interest. And the tragedy is that he is destroying the Indo-Canadian relationship, which, as General Kulkarni mentioned, been put together in the last 10, 15 years. We had absolutely no problem with this country. We had the best of relations. And here you have a man coming along and believing that it's, he is indistinguishable from Canada, and his survival, his political survival, his next tenure as Prime Minister depends, on
Isn't
everything.
there a limit? Can he just keep standing for election? Isn't there a limit? Like, isn't it like 2 and you're done?
It
Or he
doesn't.
can keep going?
Canada doesn't have any term limits like the United States
No.
does. So Trudeau can hope to be in power in all perpetuity for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years, which is what he has in mind. That he has this lovely little vote bank filled with terrorists and extremists and separatists and drug traffickers and gangsters and all of that, and they will keep bringing him back to power because they can, drum up these numbers of 5,000, 10,000 in every constituency and ensure that his party wins. But unfortunately, it looks like it's the end of the road for him, given his approval ratings.
That's what we were saying last time also, and then he came back. And remember, this is a very sparsely populated country. It's not like India. So when you say 5,000, 10,000 votes in a block, Canada, that's huge.
It's a landslide.
That's a landslide. So, you're talking really different numbers. But I just want to thank both of you for coming in today. And it was such fun to chat with you. I do hope we can have these conversations again, the three of us, without all the other, side shows that we usually have. Because I personally think we're heading towards World War III. But then that's just me, the fiction writer or the imaginator, who's really taking, my imagination is taking flight. Like I'm tuned into, anyway, I think I watch too much Al Jazeera, which is always.
You're a great Kahani writer.
Yeah. So I just feel we're heading that way. And I think we need to understand a little more about, things like what you both are experts in and talk about, for us to get a sense of what's going on in the world, because the news is frankly really scary. And if you watch the news and what's happening, you feel like, oh my God, this is it. Right. And so I hope both of you will come back and chat with us about that. And of course, I want to hear General Kulkarni about your Siachen story. I was just telling him before we went live that I read about it, and for me, just a cold, that's enough. Forget the enemies, and my mind is always like, I'm a writer. I write films, I write books. My mind is always, and I was like, it'd make a great film. And then I'm thinking, oh my God, it'd be impossible to shoot this. It'd be so tough to shoot this. And then I'm saying, imagine if it's so tough to shoot it, guys, as a film writer, filmmaker, imagine how tough it must have been to be actually there, taking one step at a time, climbing up, holding on.
Advaita, what they say, don't be a Gama in the land of Lama. So it's very important.
One step at a time.
Absolutely.
And I'm so glad you made that point, because, it's so hard fought, this territorial integrity, by individuals like General Kulkarni and by our freedom fighters and our founding fathers and mothers, that you can't let jerks sitting a couple of miles away, 1,000 miles away, come in and just trifle and play around with it. I'm so glad we showed them the door, and they needed to be shown the door. And let's hope that China and Trudeau's connection comes out in the mainstream media in Canada, and he's booted out and relegated to the dustbins of history. I don't need to be diplomatic about Trudeau. So that's my last word on this. Once again, thank you so much. And if you enjoyed this show, please go ahead and like, share, subscribe. I've been informed that YouTube has shadow banned us, which is unsurprising. Elon, can you buy YouTube? But meanwhile, we'll keep doing these shows, because I know that we have a loyal following who come back and search when they don't get notifications and watch the shows. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and see you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you. God bless. Jai Hind.